So dear learners, in today's session we are going to focus on this Factories Act role in today's reality. How Factories Act, the law to be considered in a new workplace reality. As you all know, the Labour Ministry, they have set to bring the Factories Act 1948 in line with the 21st century reality, and it is likely to do away with the provisions, whatever it has been required in spittoons or drying lines in factories across the country. So this is a great move of an ongoing review about the Factories Act. There are several outdated provisions as well, what I have discussed in the previous lecture video. What is important now? To have a good standard of service, to ensure proper and hygienic facilities are maintained, should be maintained for workers rather than to mandate certain things. So while all these years the ministry, they have revisited the Factories Act, the amendments sought to see some regulation based on the hours of work and overtime to workers, and also proposed doubling the threshold of workers for the definition of factory. Officials, they have pointed out that such provisions, they add to the compliance burden of factory owners, but stress the factories that should provide requisite facilities to the workers. And when you talk about women, the role of women, the employment of women in factories, because women in our country, they form an integral part of our workforce, right? So they face certain discrimination in the workplace. There was a time where women were not allowed to do any job, but that was later amended, and now women can do any job they choose to do. Even though there are laws against discrimination, women faces in a workplace, especially in work which is usually seen as a men's job, with factories or mine. As per the Article 15 of Constitution of India, there will be no discrimination based on gender in anything. Yet, some women face discrimination. So, Factories Act 1948 does provide many provisions related to women, women's health, safety, well-being and benefits as well. In section 19, last lecture video where we discusses about latrines and urinals, where every factory must have enough of that accommodation for both men and women, which should be accessible to all the workers at all times. No person can be barred from using them at any time. And the employer must maintain adequate cleanliness and sanitation in the latrinals and urinals all the time. But unfortunately, both women and men had to work overtime with no toilet breaks by their employer. And that too in this COVID-19 pandemic situation should continue supplying the growing demands of the consumers. So this is all very necessary for keeping the workers healthy. There should always be washing places nearby. Employer has to ensure about adequate cleanliness and sanitation. And work on or near machinery in motion, right? So this section exists to prevent any dangerous injury to any woman or child. That is the lacuna in the garment factories or clothes factories. Women are being fired, they are being underpaid in the current pandemic situation. In the lockdown, many people sat in their homes without work and hence without money. After the lockdown was lifted, the factories only allowed up to 30% of their workforce. So that makes many people still unemployed. Female workers who had children were asked to not come to work, to not endanger their own lives and their children's lives. But the workers after some time needed money to feed their families. The 30% workforce was allowed to follow the social distancing norms. And it was the bare necessity, right? Many factories laid off their workers as they found it to be more convenient than keeping them idle or on the sidelines till the pandemic ends. As the end of the pandemic is nowhere in sight even now. Apart from that, many women suffered pay cuts and partial work due to the pandemic and losses incurred by the industries. Many brands cancelled their orders, closed their shops. This reduced the demand for clothes and further reduced the demand for work, and hence workers along with their incurring more loss. That made the factory owners resort to paying the cuts and laying off their employees. That left many women jobless or even with an underpaid job. In factories, if you see, women are not favored over men. As much of the work in factories is heavy lifting, it's very hazardous, life-threatening, which all is exempted to be done by women. And hence they can only do a specific work in only certain factories. But even that is now being taken away from them in this COVID-19 pandemic. Even before the pandemic, the work prospect of women and chances to get a job in a factory was low, as many factories don't hire women. And due to the high population of our country, there are always fewer job opportunities. Women need these jobs, as women who work in factories, usually they have a child or two. They need to take care of them. Their husband's salary might not be enough in some cases, and hence they also must go to work and earn for the welfare of their family. There is a foundation called Favia. They have once started and come out with a particular statement that violence is very common in Indian garment factories. It ranges from verbal abuse to physical, even sexual harassments and even rape. Section 11 of the Factories Act talks about cleanliness and other things, and you need to take care of all such abusive things. See, even many factories make workers work in horrible sanitation surroundings. They completely ignore the mandate. Even they violate multiple health and sanitation demands from the Factory Act. Improper ventilation. Workers sometimes go outside the factory to breathe properly. They call it as a breath of fresh air. Factory owners, they get away with all of this by cleaning up the mess for a few days in case of any inspection by the authorities. Then everything will be not the same way, and of course, as I said, it will be highly of a hazardous situation, horrible sanitation things. Many workers, they don't even have proper lighting in their workplaces. So they prefer day shifts, working using the lights of the sun. But at dark with poor lighting, it is really hard to work. Especially work like weaving clothes or sewing clothes. ILO, the International Labour Organization, it has stated clearly how important lighting is in any factory and how it even increases work efficiency. So, with regard to the provisions mentioned in the Factories Act, should be practiced in real time with utmost care and concern. Most of this welfare are basic human needs. Sitting areas, canteens, facilities for the first aid. Most factories should even have welfare officers to look after the needs of the workmen and women. But many factories lack that. With broken benches, old tables which have not been changed for years. So how well we are mandating according to the provisions mentioned in that, and how far we are following it up. And improvement and initiative to protect women's interest. There is a vocational training for women under the Directorate Act of Employment and Training. And this training program was made to make women independent. And so they could speak up, talk and learn. This training program helps them in getting better jobs in the market. So every time when you come out with a new initiative, see to that it is properly implicated. Government of India has done quite a few things for women in factories. There are maternity benefits. Under the Act, Maternity Benefits Act 1961, the maternity leave, what work the woman will be allowed to do after she comes back to work. Even it not only talks about just the maternity benefits, but also certain other benefits. Many provisions of the Factories Act aim at the welfare of women and focus on their well-being and go to the extent of penalizing the employer if the women are not given the certain benefits. Making it as a policy, women in factories, they have faced many hardships. There was a time they were denied jobs or were given jobs with subpar conditions, less than average wages, which they had to still take as they were desperate. It improved to the point that legislation was implemented to aid them, but the benefits were only on paper and not practically. Now finally, the benefits are showing in practice with the help of different NGOs and United Nations welfare schemes, along with women care bodies established by government. So women in factories are finally getting what they truly deserve. Women are getting the wages, they are receiving the most benefits that they are supposed to. Though there are some places where they still need help, but it has improved a lot. It was a decade ago where it wasn't that conducive work environment for women. But we must stay vigilant, as then only then we stop exploration of any kind, can be man, woman or child. The government must keep implementing laws for the benefit of all and make bodies to see the valid practical implementation of those beneficial laws. Only then we can say, yes, we have achieved true equality and women in all workplaces. So with regard to women, the role, the provisions in Factories Act, I think so far we have discussed. Now I am going to discuss about the roles and responsibilities of a factory inspector. He is a professional who examines the elements of a factory or the plant's operation to ensure safety, quality and compliance with regulations. Factory inspectors can be employed by many different organizations and they can have varying areas of expertise. The main job of any factory inspector is to help improve the safety of the factory and its products for both workers and consumers. And in the late 19th century, factory inspectors, they become common when many governments enacted the laws that regulates the procedures within the factories. Some of the first government employed inspectors, they have attempted to root out the use of child labor, quality assurance, self-safety preparedness, labor law adherence, environmental standards. These were the concerns for the people who are factory inspectors. Though a great many factory inspectors are employed by the government, many also work for insurance agencies, labor unions. It's a greater boon, factory inspector, to either of these organizations, or even they can perform some regular inspections to ensure that a manufacturing plant adheres to the insurance or union standards. See, if you look at this pandemic scenario, we have gone through so much, especially workers. The COVID-19 period witnessed several legislations both at the state and the central level, hurting the hard-earned labor rights over centuries. capitalizing on the extraordinary situation created by the pandemic. Several state governments, they are hurriedly, even unwisely, passed some government orders extending the maximum hours of work in a day from 8 to 12 and in a week from 48 to 60. States like Uttar Pradesh and Gujarat, the judiciary struck them due to their illegality. Some states dared to enter where angels feared to tread by making sweeping changes in all. Some major labor laws like Factories Act 1948, ID Act 1947. At the same time, the central government enacted 3 codes: Industrial Relations Code IRC, Occupational Safety and Health and Working Condition Code, and Social Security Code SSC. The codes afforded considerable flexibility to employers and contractors by exempting more establishments from regulations concerning standing orders, retrenchment, closure, safety and health, and contract labor welfare. The codes provided some benefits to the working class like universal minimum wage, trade union recognition, social security for platform workers, wider definition of migrant workers. So the corpus of legislation provides some benefits which, due to the lack of effective implementation machinery, and that will to implement on the part of the government. Another side, if you look at this, the employer friendly clauses are easy to implement as they significantly reduce the role of the government in the labor market that owes to increased non-coverage of establishment and workers. This is the irony of labor law, which is often missed out by the commentators. Laws deregulate, thereby cause the retrenchment. This brings to the issue of governance of labor market. Labor market governance, it comprises of 2 aspects. Let me put this way. 1, administration of labor law. 2, collection of labor statistics. The first year of COVID-19 brought to light the complete absence of labor market governance. Virtually, there was no record of interstate migrant workers. And what happened to them during that particular period of pandemic? Even Supreme Court wondered in 2017 about the Comptroller and Auditor General didn't even know where the 20,000 crore collected under the Building and Other Construction Workers Ceases Act meant for spending on construction worker welfare had gone. So the unorganized workers did not receive any welfare measures which they are supposed to. What has changed? What hasn't changed? With regard to the pandemic situation, we have witnessed even the second wave of reverse migration of workers. Some state governments like Maharashtra, New Delhi, they have appealed to the migrant workers to stay back. Thousands of them have gone back to their villages. The first period exposed the utter collapse of the labor administrative system. And let me just put the major issues faced that time. State governments, they didn't even disperse a single rupee from the building and other construction workers that time. And then central government, they has proposed 5 pan-India surveys on migrant workers, domestic workers, employment generated by professionals, employment generated in transport sector. The government is expecting so much of migration from one city to the other place. And the Union Budget 2021, they didn't provide much comfort to the millions of informal workers. And there was an absence of macro level unemployment. Especially during the high unemployment prone COVID-19 time, it was hugely disturbing fact is that there wasn't macro level unemployment insurance related schemes. the government has persisted with the tough conditions-laced unemployment insurance scheme. So it was a tough time during the pandemic situation. The law which was enacted to amend, to regulate the labor welfare in factories was supposed to be in a good way. The role of factory inspector, the chief inspectors have been given an authority by the state government to exercise their power in factories. They are appointed for the local limits as the government finds it best. So on behalf of government, on behalf of the NGOs, everyone is doing their job clearly. As far as factories have been concerned, when you are in the business of manufacturing a product, it's hard to see factories as anything but a positive one, because they are creating jobs, they bring prosperity. Most importantly, they create product that is the lifeblood of any company. So if you are planning to open a new factory, it is very important to remember that the residents and regulators near your proposed facility may have more of an eye towards its disadvantages than its advantages, right? So understanding both sides of the situation, it can help you prepare for the pushback. So what's the biggest advantage? It's like stimulates the economic activity. One of the primary advantages of factory is that even a relatively small one is an engine that generates economic activity. The factory itself may source some of its materials locally, and both the office and production staff will need to buy work clothes, lunch, many other things. So they will fill their tanks at the local filling station on their way to and from work, and trucks, whether inbound with raw materials or outbound with finished products, will do the same. Taxes paid by the company and its staff will contribute to the budget of each level of government, helping provide services to the residents and pay for the infrastructure that makes the factory possible. So the biggest advantage is that it stimulates the economic activity. Second advantage of having a factory is that it's a mixed bag job. For much of the last century, if you see, a manufacturing job was the gold standard for blue-collar success, a skilled and well-paid job that provides a comfortable living. That isn't not necessarily the case anymore, with automation and technology reducing the number of manufacturing jobs and skills they require. While manufacturing jobs typically still they are getting a pay better than other non-manufacturing jobs, but wages have been relatively stagnant, or even it is getting declined with some other sectors. So if your factory is located in an economically depressed area, the prospect of jobs or any jobs will be greeted with enthusiasm. But in more prosperous areas, you may face some negative publicity and political headwinds if your proposed level of wages and benefits don't meet with the local expectations. So there is another side to look upon about the job creation in a factory. And there is one more burden on infrastructure that, see, you need to judge carefully about the impact on the local infrastructure. Depending on the proposed factory size and the needs, the impact may be of an absolute deal breaker or a non-factor. That may take any different forms. If your factory increases traffic dramatically in its surrounding area, it may place an intolerable load on local traffic pattern or even physically on the roads and bridges. You may also represent a competitor for limited resources. Your factory might take away a crucial swath of farmland. See, you may require a large quantity of water in an area where it is already scarce. If your company is in a position to provide infrastructure that becomes usable by the community, perhaps that subsidize an upgraded level to a local highway so it can carry the added volume to the factory. That mitigates the problem, even that turns into a positive one. So in this case, with regard to Factories Act, we need to understand the scenario where there are several different ways it can impact. especially with the environment. The obvious potential disadvantage of a factory is its impact on the local environment. Depending on what you manufacture and how you manufacture it, and byproducts of the process may pollute the local soil, water, air. You have to navigate to the local, state and federal ordinances in varying degrees. And it's very important to remember that the regulatory environment will likely change numerous times during your factory's life expectancy. So as part of the planning process, it might be prudent to exceed the current anti-pollution standards as a hedge against future restrictions. So going one step further to improve sustainability by using less energy or generating less waste than your peers, to forestall the potential criticism or generate a positive publicity for the proposed factory and brand. So these are the ways in which the Factories Act expects and how the factories are contributing, and what are the necessary things we need to keep it in our mind. See, as more people they have moved from towns to cities over the years, factories in large urban centers, they have provided work opportunities. Factories offer both white collar and blue collar jobs. They cater to the workers with different academic backgrounds, right? Employees who live in the city won't have to travel far to work, which help them save on transportation cost. But people who move to urban centers will need places to stay, which creates an opportunity for others to provide rental apartments. So as more people have moved from towns to cities over the years, factories in large urban centers have provided work opportunities, which again in turn creates an opportunity to provide apartments and things like that. So in terms of factories growth, there are several benefits in having a factory. Advantages of our towns will benefit with both the local residents and with the migrated people. But disadvantages is there as well. More strain on available resources makes more challenging lifestyle. Planning a city's infrastructure like roads and services will also be very much difficult. So these are all the things we need to keep it in mind. So as far as the Factories Act 1948 provisions are being concerned, we should implement that properly. Like the situation of COVID-19 pandemic situations, which was completely unimaginable. So how rightly we implement the provisions, how well we can revise the outdated provisions, how the workers can get benefited properly, in what are the different ways the welfare measures can be taken care. Women should be given more importance, their welfare measures should be taken care. What are the advantages and disadvantages of having factories across it, how the labor code should be. So these are all the things we have discussed in Factories Act 1948. Make a note of it. We'll meet you all in the next session. Thank you.